At Christmas dinner, my sister called my 5-year-old son illegitimate. But his response, Auntie Sandra, Daddy says you have 3 kids with 3 men you never married, made my sister turn white and leave. Hi there. If you enjoy heartfelt stories like this, hit subscribe, drop a hi, and let us know where in the world you're joining from. Let's get into it. I should have known something was wrong when Sandra arrived 2 hours early to Mom's house that Christmas Eve. My older sister never did anything without a reason, and punctuality definitely wasn't her strong suit. I was in the kitchen helping Mom with the sweet potato casserole when I heard her voice, that particular tone she used when she wanted everyone to know she'd arrived. Well, look who actually showed up this year, Sandra announced, her heels clicking against the hardwood floor. I wiped my hands on my apron and forced a smile. Mateo, my 5-year-old son, was playing with his new trucks in the living room, completely oblivious to the tension that had just walked through the door. My husband, James, squeezed my shoulder as he passed by with the groceries we'd brought. Hey Sandra, I said, keeping my voice neutral. Merry Christmas. She looked me up and down with that same judgmental expression she'd perfected over the years. Behind her stood her current boyfriend, I'd lost count at this point, carrying an expensive bottle of wine like it was an entry ticket to respectability. Mom rushed over, always the peacemaker. Sandra, you're early. The ham won't be ready for another few hours. I wanted to spend quality time with my family, Sandra said, her eyes never leaving me. All of my family. That's when I felt it, that familiar knot in my stomach. The same one I'd felt at countless family gatherings where Sandra made sure everyone knew she was the successful one, the prettier one, the one who'd never settled like I supposedly had. If you're enjoying this story, please hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. You won't want to miss what happens next. Growing up, Sandra was always Mom and Dad's favorite. She was 3 years older, and from the moment I could form memories, I knew I was second place. Sandra got the bigger bedroom, the newer clothes, the car for her 16th birthday, while I got a "we'll share it" lecture that somehow meant she had it on weekends and I got weekday mornings if I was lucky. But I'd worked hard to move past all that. I'd gone to community college, gotten my nursing degree, married James, a good man who loved me and Mateo with everything he had. We'd built a decent life, owned a small house, and I was proud of where we'd come from. Sandra, on the other hand, had bounced from one failed relationship to another. She'd had 3 children with 3 different men, none of whom she'd married. Not that marriage was necessary, but Sandra had always made such a big deal about traditional values when it came to judging everyone else's choices. Mateo, baby, come say hi to Aunt Sandra, I called out, trying to keep things civil. My son bounded into the kitchen, his gap-toothed smile lighting up the room. He was wearing his favorite Christmas sweater, the one with Rudolph that lit up when you pressed the nose. Hi, Auntie Sandra, Mateo said cheerfully. Sandra barely glanced at him. Hello. The dismissal stung, but I was used to it. What I wasn't prepared for was what she said next. Still living in that rental, I see from your Facebook posts, she said, examining her nails. Must be hard not having generational wealth to fall back on. James's jaw tightened beside me. We own our home, actually. Oh, Sandra said with mock surprise. How quaint. Dinner preparations continued with forced pleasantries and underlying tension. Dad arrived home from his shift at the post office. He always worked Christmas Eve, and the house filled with more relatives. My Aunt Carol, Uncle Vernon, and my younger cousin Destiny all brought dishes and laughter that temporarily masked the poison Sandra was slowly dripping into the evening. Mateo helped me set the table, carefully placing each fork and spoon exactly where I showed him. He was such a good kid, always eager to help, always trying to make everyone happy. He got that from his father. Mommy, why doesn't Auntie Sandra smile? Mateo whispered to me as we folded napkins. I knelt down to his level. Some people have a harder time showing happiness, baby. It's not about you. But I knew better. Sandra's coldness was absolutely about us. About her inability to be happy for anyone else's success, no matter how modest. She'd always measured her worth by standing on top of others, and lately I'd been refusing to be her stepping stool. Everyone, dinner's ready. Mom called out, her voice carrying that desperate cheerfulness of someone trying to hold together a fracturing family. We all gathered around the extended dining table. The room smelled incredible. Honey-glazed ham, collard greens, macaroni and cheese, cornbread, and all the fixings. Mom had outdone herself as always. These gatherings meant everything to her, which was probably why Sandra chose them as her stage for maximum damage. As we held hands for grace, I felt Mateo's small palm in mine, sticky from the candy cane he'd been sneaking. On my other side, James's hand was strong and steady. Whatever was coming, we'd face it together. Dad said grace, thanking God for family, health, and the food before us. As everyone chorused, "Yun," plates began filling with steaming portions of Mom's cooking. The conversation flowed easily at first. Work stories, updates about Destiny's new job, Uncle Vernon's hilarious account of their neighbor's Christmas light disaster. Sandra waited until everyone was comfortable, guards down, before she struck. "So Jasmine," she said, using my full name instead of the Jazz everyone called me. "How's that nursing job at the county hospital? Still emptying bedpans?" I took a slow breath. "I'm actually in the ICU now. I love what I do." "How noble," Sandra said, taking a delicate bite of ham. "I just got promoted to senior marketing director. 6-figure salary, corner office, company car. But I'm sure your work is fulfilling in its own way." James's fork clinked against his plate a little too hard. "Jazz saves lives. What do you do again? Sell people things they don't need." Sandra's eyes flashed dangerously. "I create desire. I build brands. Some of us have ambition beyond collecting a steady paycheck." "Sandra," Mom warned quietly, her eyes pleading. "It's Christmas." But Sandra wasn't done. She'd been loading her gun all evening and now she was ready to fire. She turned her attention to Mateo, who was happily demolishing his second helping of mac and cheese, completely oblivious to the adult warfare happening around him. "Mateo is getting so big," Sandra said, her tone shifting to something that made my skin crawl. 5 years old now, right? "Just turned 5 in November," I confirmed, wondering where this was going. "And James, you two have been married how long now?" James wiped his mouth with his napkin, his expression guarded. 4 years this past June. I could see the calculation happening in Sandra's eyes, that malicious gleam she got when she was about to expose someone's secrets, real or imagined. My heart started racing because I knew exactly where this was headed and I was powerless to stop it. 4 years married, 5-year-old son, Sandra mused loudly enough for everyone to hear. Interesting math. The table went quiet. Even Destiny stopped mid-bite, her eyes wide. "Sandra, don't," I warned, my voice low and tight. But she'd already committed. This was what she'd come for, her Christmas gift to herself, my humiliation. "I'm just saying what everyone's thinking," Sandra continued, her voice dripping with false concern. "In our family we've always valued doing things the right way, the moral way. But I guess different people have different standards." Mom's face had gone pale. "This is not the time or place." "When is the time?" Sandra interrupted. "When do we talk about the fact that my sister had a baby out of wedlock and then trapped some man into marrying her? When do we acknowledge that Mateo is illegitimate?" The word hung in the air like a bomb. Illegitimate. I felt James tense beside me, ready to explode, but before either of us could respond, I heard a small voice that shattered my heart into a million pieces. "Mommy? What's illegitimate mean?" Mateo was looking up at me with those big, innocent eyes, trying to sound out a word he'd never heard before, unaware it had just been weaponized against him by his own aunt. This is where everything changed. "Stay with me, you need to hear what happened next." Time seemed to stop. I looked at my baby boy, his face confused but still trusting, still believing the world was good and people were kind. At 5 years old, he didn't understand cruelty yet. He didn't know that family could hurt you worse than strangers ever could. "It's nothing, baby," I managed, my voice cracking. "It's just a mean word that Aunt Sandra shouldn't have used." "Oh, don't sugarcoat it, Jasmine," Sandra pressed, clearly enjoying herself. "The boy should know the truth about his origins. In polite society, children born outside of marriage are considered." "That's enough," James roared, standing so fast his chair toppled backward. "You don't get to talk about my son like that." I don't give a damn about your polite society or your self-righteous bullshit. James, please, Mom begged, tears now streaming down her face. Let's all just calm down. But there was no calming down from this. Sandra had crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed. She'd attacked my child, our child, at the dinner table on Christmas Eve in front of the entire family. She'd used her venom on an innocent 5-year-old boy who'd done nothing but exist. I'm just speaking the truth, Sandra said, examining her nails casually as if she hadn't just detonated a nuclear bomb. Maybe if you'd kept your legs closed until after a wedding, we wouldn't be having this conversation. The table erupted. Aunt Carol gasped. Uncle Vernon started shouting at Sandra. Dad was frozen in his seat, his face unreadable. Destiny looked like she wanted to disappear into the floor. And Mateo? My sweet boy just sat there, tears beginning to form in his eyes because he could feel the anger in the room even if he didn't understand the words. In that moment my mind flashed back to 6 years ago. Before Mateo, before James as my husband, back when my life was falling apart. I'd been dating someone else then. Terrence. We'd been together for 2 years and I'd thought he was the one. We talked about marriage, about building a future. Then I got pregnant and everything changed. He disappeared faster than morning mist, blocked my number, moved to another state. I was 23, pregnant and alone. I'd cried for weeks, terrified about doing it alone. But then James entered my life, or rather re-entered it. We'd been friends in high school and he'd moved back to town for a new job. When he found out I was pregnant and single, he didn't run. He showed up. He came to doctor's appointments. He held my hand during labor. He was there when Mateo took his first breath. I don't care if he's biologically mine or not, James had told me when Mateo was 2 months old and we'd been dating for a month. I love you and I love this baby. If you'll have me, I want to be his father. Not a stepfather. His father. We got married when Mateo was 1. James legally adopted him. Our son has never known any other father, and James has never treated him as anything less than his own flesh and blood. But Sandra knew the story. Mom had told her years ago during one of their shopping trips, and Sandra had filed that information away like ammunition, waiting for the perfect moment to use it. This was that moment. And watching my son's face crumple as the adults around him screamed at each other, I felt something inside me crack wide open. Not sadness but rage. Then in the middle of all the shouting, a small voice cut through the chaos like a knife through butter. Auntie Sandra, Mateo said, his voice remarkably clear and steady for a 5-year-old. Daddy says you have 3 kids with 3 men you never married. The entire room went silent. Every single person froze mid-gesture, mid-word, mid-breath. The only sound was the Christmas music still playing softly from the speaker in the living room. Something about joy to the world. Sandra's face went white. Not pale, white. Like someone had drained all the blood from her body in one instant. What did you say? She whispered, her voice barely audible. Mateo, oblivious to the bombshell he'd just dropped, continued innocently. Daddy told me last week when I asked why my cousins have different last names. He said you have Madison with Mr. Derek and Cameron with Mr. Antoine, and baby Zoe with Mr. Michael. And you didn't marry any of them. I looked at James, whose face was a mixture of shock and something that might have been pride. He gave me a tiny shrug that said, I might have mentioned it when he asked. He asked about his cousins, James said defensively to my unspoken question. I told him the truth. Was I supposed to lie? Sandra's boyfriend, whatever his name was, slowly turned to look at her. 3 kids. You told me you only had Madison and that her father was deceased. Oh, this was getting better and worse simultaneously. I can explain, Sandra started, but her voice had lost all its earlier venom. He sounded small, desperate, caught. Uncle Vernon let out a low whistle. Well, damn. Sandra stood abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor with a sound like fingernails on a chalkboard. Her carefully constructed superiority was crumbling in real time, and we all watched it happen with a mixture of horror and fascination. You had no right to discuss my personal life with a child, she hissed at James, but her power was gone. She was a deflated balloon, all the hot air rushing out. And you had no right to call my son illegitimate at the dinner table, James fired back. But here we are. Boys, Dad tried, finally finding his voice. No, Dad, I interrupted, standing up and putting my hands on Mateo's shoulders protectively. For once, let's not sweep this under the rug. Let's not pretend Sandra didn't just attack a 5-year-old child. Let's not act like this is normal family dysfunction that we all need to tolerate for the sake of keeping the peace. Mom was crying openly now. Jez, please, she's your sister. She stopped being my sister the moment she called my son illegitimate, I said, my voice shaking with emotion. Do you understand what she did? She tried to make my baby feel less than, feel unwanted, feel like he doesn't belong. On Christmas, at the family dinner table, Aunt Carol stood up, her chair scraping back. Jasmine's right. Sandra, that was cruel. That was unforgivably cruel. Oh, please, Sandra scoffed, trying to regain her composure. I was just stating facts. It's not my fault if the truth hurts. The truth. I laughed bitterly. You want to talk about truth? Let's talk about how you've been judging my life for years while yours is a complete mess. 3 different baby daddies, none of whom stuck around. At least James is here. At least Mateo has a father who loves him. Sandra's face twisted with rage and humiliation. How dare you? How dare I? I was trembling now, years of suppressed anger finally erupting. How dare you? You've spent my entire life making me feel small. Every achievement I had, you diminished. Every choice I made, you criticized. When I got into nursing school, you asked if I couldn't get into a real college. When I bought my house, you asked if it was in a safe neighborhood. When I married James, you asked if I was sure he wasn't just after my situation. The words were pouring out now, unstoppable. Years of hurt, of biting my tongue, of being the bigger person because Mom asked me to, because family is family, because blood is thicker than water. All of it was erupting like a volcano. You know what the saddest part is? I continued. I actually looked up to you when we were kids. I thought you were so cool, so confident, so beautiful. I wanted to be like you. But you're not confident, you're insecure. Every time you put me down, it's because you need to feel better about yourself. Every time you judge my choices, it's because you regret your own. Sandra's boyfriend quietly stood up and headed toward the door. I'm gonna go, he muttered. Mateo, baby, James said softly, gently lifting our son. Let's go look at the Christmas lights outside for a minute. But I want my pie, Mateo protested. We'll have pie later, champ. Come on. James carried him out and I heard the front door close. Now it was just family, raw, angry, and finally honest. Dad cleared his throat. Maybe we should all take a breath. No, I said firmly. We're going to finish this conversation. Sandra was breathing hard, her perfect makeup starting to streak from sweat and barely contained tears. You think you're so much better than me? You think your little perfect life with your rent-a-husband and someone else's baby makes you superior? He's not someone else's baby, I said, my voice dropping to something dangerous. He's my baby. And James is his father in every way that matters. But yes, Sandra, I do think I'm better than you. Not because of my marriage or my job or my house. I'm better than you because I don't tear down children to feel important. Aunt Carol stood up and moved to my side. I've wanted to say this for years, Sandra. You're a bully. You've always been a bully and we've all enabled it because your parents, she looked at Mom and Dad, made excuses for you your entire life. That's not fair, Mom protested weakly. Isn't it? Uncle Vernon chimed in. Linda, you know I love you, but you've let Sandra run roughshod over this family for decades. She says cruel things and you ask everyone else to forgive her because that's just how Sandra is. When does it stop? Dad sat silent, his hands folded on the table, staring at his untouched plate. Destiny spoke up, her voice small but steady. Aunt Sandra, you made me cry at my high school graduation because you said my dress made me look cheap. I was 17. And you told me I'd never keep a man because I was too career-focused, Aunt Carol added. This was at my promotion dinner. Sandra looked around the table, seeing for perhaps the first time the damage she'd inflicted over the years. But instead of remorse, I saw defiance blooming in her eyes. So I'm the villain now? She laughed bitterly. Fine. I'm the villain. You know what your problem is, Jasmine? Sandra's voice had taken on an edge of hysteria. You've always been weak. You let Terrence walk all over you, got yourself knocked up, and then trapped the first decent man who showed you attention. You call it love. I call it desperation. That's when something inside me broke. Not in a bad way, in a liberating way. Like chains I didn't even know I was wearing suddenly snapped off. You're right about one thing, I said calmly, eerily calmly. I was desperate back then. Desperate, scared, and alone. And you know what you did when you found out I was pregnant? You laughed. You actually laughed and said, well, you made your bed. Mom gasped. Sandra, you didn't. She did, I confirmed. I called her crying and she laughed. That's who you are, Sandra. You kick people when they're down because you're fundamentally broken inside. Sandra grabbed her purse, her hands shaking. I don't have to listen to this. No, you don't, I agreed. You can leave. You can walk out that door and never come back, and honestly, we'd all be better off. But before you go, I want you to understand something. That little boy out there looking at Christmas lights? He's going to grow up knowing he's loved unconditionally. He's going to know what a real family looks like. Not perfect, but honest and supportive. He'll never wonder if his father chose him, because James chooses him every single day. I moved closer to Sandra, my voice dropping. Your kids, they're going to grow up wondering why none of their fathers stayed. And when they're old enough to understand, they'll realize it wasn't about the fathers. It was about you. You're toxic, Sandra. You're poison. And I'm done drinking it. Sandra left without another word, her heels clicking rapidly toward the door. We heard her car start, the engine roaring as she peeled out of the driveway. Her boyfriend had already disappeared, probably called an Uber from the front yard. The silence that followed was heavy but somehow cleaner, like air after a thunderstorm. Mom was still crying. Dad was staring at nothing. But Aunt Carol hugged me tight, whispering, I'm proud of you. James and Mateo came back inside, Mateo's nose red from the cold. Are we having pie now? He asked hopefully. Yeah, baby, I said, kneeling down to his level. We're having pie now. Is Auntie Sandra gone? Yes. Good, he said simply. She was mean. We had pie. We opened presents. We sang Christmas carols. But something fundamental had shifted. Mom pulled me aside later as we cleaned up. I'm sorry, she whispered. I'm sorry I always asked you to be the bigger person. I'm sorry I protected her instead of you. 3 months later, Sandra sent a text. Not an apology, just a rambling justification about how everyone had turned against her. I deleted it without responding. 6 months after that, I heard through Aunt Carol that Sandra had moved to another state, taking Madison but leaving Cameron and Zoe with their fathers. Mateo is 8 now. He's thriving, happy, confident, loved. He calls James Dad without the hesitation that used to creep in. We don't see Sandra anymore and I don't miss her. Sometimes love means setting boundaries. Sometimes family means choosing who gets to stay at your table. And sometimes the best gift you can give your child is showing them that they deserve respect, even if that means standing up to the people who are supposed to love you most. That Christmas dinner destroyed a relationship, but it built something stronger. It built my son's understanding that he is wanted, chosen, and loved. And that's worth every broken family tie. If this story resonated with you, please subscribe and share your thoughts in the comments. Have you ever had to set boundaries with toxic family members? You're not alone.